Welcome.
Welcome.
Welcome to First Parish, Unitarian Universalist of Arlington.
We choose.
We choose.
We choose to be
A liberal religious community.
Welcoming.
Welcoming to all.
We encourage each other
on our spiritual journeys.
Support one another.
Through the changes in our lives.
And challenge the excesses
and injustices of our time.
Called to love.
To love.
To love.
And upheld by joy.
We live our faith.
As we come to a time of inward reflection, sometimes called prayer, sometimes called meditation, sometimes just a stillness, I invite you to adopt whatever posture helps you settle in to that sacred quiet. Autumn has arrived. Can you feel it? Holy One, great mystery, we sense you in the changing temperature, the extra blanket we pull onto our beds, the cool breeze. You are here in this changing season. Trees are coming into their beauty, full of vibrant colors, red, yellow, orange. We know their magnificence is fleeting. A burst of color and energy before the rhythms of winter settle in and the leaves fall to the ground. The wonders of nature remind us of the cycle of life. We are aware of human losses that feel close to home. Some of that grief are for those we know well. We think of pillars of our congregation, Barbara and Diane, both who passed 6 days ago. Both who are held in our hearts this day. The autumn trees and their leaves remind us of life's tenderness. Sometimes it feels like we are surrounded by the reality of death. We think of Marcellus Williams, unjustly executed in Missouri on Tuesday. We send prayers to the family of John Corcoran, cyclist hit and killed on Memorial Drive this week. It can feel like too much. Lives destroyed in Florida, North Carolina, the onslaught of harsh weather across southern states, the ongoing violence in Israel and Palestine and Lebanon. Grief can take our breath away. Holy One, help us to find it again. Help us to return to the inhale and the exhale. How do we connect to the wisdom of the season? Trees knowing in their bones what is to come, and yet still showing off their beauty. Collages of color dotting the sky, deep hues of vibrancy reaching their branches up towards the heavens. Even as they know, even as we know, that the magic is fleeting. Help us to linger, to savor what is sweet in a world sometimes thought to be barren. May we know the real wisdom of the seasons. Beauty will come and go, and then return again. Inhale, exhale, return again. Let us settle into 2 minutes of shared silence.
Midway through the summer, I went to a familiar place in Boston Common and saw a very unfamiliar play, an outdoor production of Shakespeare's play A Winter's Tale, free and open to the public. If you are scratching your head right now, wondering why you've never heard of the play A Winter's Tale, I'm sure you're not alone. It's a wild play, friends. Let me give you the quickest of recaps. In the first 2 scenes, the main character, a king named Leonidas, I'm clearly pronouncing that wrong, accuses his pregnant wife of infidelity with a childhood best friend who happens to also be a king from another nation who has been visiting. Leonidas kicks his friend out, he scorns and put his wife Hermione on trial, and their son dies of grief for how his dad is treating his mom. Leonidas' newborn daughter is whisked away to a foreign land to be spared of his wrath, and then Hermione seemingly dies, before, of course, the Oracle of Delphi confirms, of course, she has not been unfaithful. That's just the first act. Think of Othello's downfall, except without Iago. So Leonidas is just his own worst enemy. If you came here today looking forward to hearing a sermon about second drafts and second chances, woof, this guy gets his first draft. It was a mess. And by the end of Act 1, he knows it too. But there's nothing that he can do. The play's second half finds Leonidas' daughter all grown up, living in a foreign kingdom, and through a truly odd series of events, this production is staged as a weird cross between a bacchanal and a rave. In a truly odd series of events, he marries Leonidas' friend's son, and they return to Leonidas' kingdom. If you're confused, it's really okay. Almost miraculously, decades later, the repentant Leonidas gets a second chance. Indeed, the miracles keep coming when a statue of Leonidas' late wife, Hermione, comes to life. Or was her friend secretly hiding her away for decades? I don't know. And Leonidas is given another chance. Another chance to love his wife, his friend, his son, and, well, not son, but his daughter. Another chance to love them anew. On the second time, it's a different kind of love that he might feel, informed by so much of his failure to love them the first time. It's a repeat, sort of, but it means something different. Oh, and he better get it right this time. Second chances, second drafts, second tries. Perhaps they're on my mind because this is my second year as your minister of religious education. But even more so, trying again is something fundamental to learning. And trying again is something core to Unitarian Universalism. I hope you leave our service today more encouraged to try again and to support others when they try again. That is one way you can live out your values that we so cherish and try to grow in the world here. While Leonides' downfall of a first draft will likely not be our story, I bet we're not strangers to the first draft, in the need of an edit. Today, I've been thinking a lot about interpersonal relationships as my examples of these bad first drafts. I'll give you a few. Jumping to conclusions. Being a crabby pants. Getting super anxious in a new social situation. Misplacing your frustration about one thing onto someone else entirely. A big mistake that lets other people down. For some reason, I remember a time when I was running in the park near my in-laws' house, and there was a particularly narrow portion of the path, and these three middle-aged women were walking towards me, and they were not giving me even a tiny little lane to pass them. And I'm thinking about how the words I said were, "Excuse me, please," but the stink that I put on them would have scared off a cheesemonger. I think I even repeated those words over and over, louder and louder, before a collision was narrowly avoided. It was a bad first draft. I encourage you to start thinking in this language of drafts, because this is not Hamilton, and we don't just have one shot at things. But it can be hard after a first draft doesn't go well to be encouraged to, as the phrase goes, get back on the horse. And I reckon, friends, that there are enough times, there's enough things we have to be stressed out about, that a lot of the time our first drafts, maybe especially lately, might not be our best. So getting in the habit of going back for a redo when it's possible is a practice I think is worth practicing. I've been trying it. With my run that day, for example, the park path was a loop. So sure, I did run into them again. My frustration having given way to that little pit of embarrassment. And this time, I slowed down and explained briefly that I was sorry for being mean earlier, and I could have been more polite. Now, this was in Connecticut, so I wasn't 100% sure what they really thought, but they said not to worry about it, and they seemed appreciative. That was a joke about Connecticut, but I love Connecticut. This is not the first time I've had to go back and say sorry for being a crabby pants. This is one thing you should know about Reverend Stevie. Sometimes can be a crabby pants. But if my first drafts can't always be kind, hopefully my second drafts will live into that. In our story, we have a different kind of first and second try going on in the story from the Time for All Ages when I was up on the ladder. Jabari has his own stumbling blocks that he has to work through. He tried climbing up the ladder, but the fear overtook him. Back on the pool deck, his dad was quite the perfect educator. Did you notice all the amazing things in that story that Jabari and Jabari's dad did to get Jabari ready for a second go? Jabari's dad helped Jabari get off the ladder with still some of his dignity intact. With all of us, but especially with kiddos, that sense of inner worth and dignity that Jabari's dad was honoring in his son, I think is a fire that fuels second tries. Nor does Jabari's dad foreclose exactly what's going to happen next. He follows Jabari's lead with, when Jabari decides that he needs to stretch and buy himself a little bit more time. He suggests maybe Jabari give it another try, and maybe it can happen later. So it takes a little of the pressure off the situation so Jabari can focus. Then he empathized with Jabari and got a little vulnerable. Sometimes Jabari's dad is scared too, and he talks Jabari through a practice that's worked for him. And Jabari's dad offers what educators might call a reframing of the scary thing that Jabari is facing. From fear to the anticipation of a surprise, something that Jabari can appreciate and even get excited about. I named a lot of things there, right? I believe these practices generalize. If we're wondering how we might support people in our lives to try again with hard things, you can show that you really care and mean it too. You can honor the dignity of that person when they're in a kind of a vulnerable moment of having a not so good first try. You can make sure that you give people agency. You can commiserate with them, and you can empathize with them. You can give advice if it's seeming welcome, and when they go for it, you can encourage them along the way. But to take a step back from the story and to appreciate also a wider view locked in the story, Jabari's dad's skills also extend to the fact that both Jabari and Jabari's dad know that Jabari is actually ready for this new challenge. He passed the swim test. He's taken his lessons. Good educators, and there are a lot of them in all parts of our lives, but especially in schools, are doing this type of calibration to help their students try new things all the time. In youth group, we call it the learning zone. There's a space where you're in your comfort zone. There's a space that you can be in your danger zone, too risky. And there's that sweet spot, right? When you're trying something new, that's your learning zone. We try to find that. Sometimes teachers and classrooms, miraculously, they are calibrating and thinking about each of their students as individuals, thinking about their different capacities and their developmental levels relative to each other and the specific needs that those individuals might have. And sometimes this is happening in a classroom of 20 plus individuals. Can you imagine that? It's not just one kid climbing up to go off the diving board, 20 plus kids. One painful and lasting impact of the COVID pandemic lockdowns and the disruptions to public education is that a lot of kids missed some key in-person time to socialize and connect with friends and classmates. And that has impacted how kids are interpersonally interacting. Today, you might encounter a young person, perhaps in the 3rd grade, who has only had the in-person socializing and community time that you might expect from a 1st grader before the pandemic we went through. So the skills they might be working on might be different, than the ones that you might expect a third grader to have. This type of calibration to reset where our expectations is another way that we live out compassion with one another. We see people for their unique needs and the place they are in the world, and we set up our expectations from there, at least in education. And it will impact when you're trying to support a young person in your life, or really anyone, how you encourage them to take a second try. What we do here in religious education here as First Parish, you might have learned about a couple of weeks ago when we introduced all of the children. But I'm going to let you in on a little secret that I tell my volunteer teachers. And it is the fact that the curriculum that we offer to them, whether it's a study in pluralism or an exploration in our connection to the environment, or if it's learning about Unitarian Universalist values and practices of justice and kindness, that whole curriculum is only important so far as it helps our young people connect with one another, to form community with one another, to make First Parish hopefully a place where they have friends who care for them and see them deeply for who they are, and that they might even look forward to coming to on Sunday and meeting up with again. This is the work right now with young people and all of us as we're living in the wake of the impacts of the COVID pandemic and the fact that we were out of connection for a little while. Is that we really are focusing down now on making sure that religious education is another place where you get to practice those community building and socio-emotional skills. So I tell those teachers, this is what I tell them, if the curriculum is getting in your way from that happening, then the curriculum should get out of the way. If the curriculum is going to help you get into that happening, then follow that curriculum where it will lead. But we really value kindness and friendship at the core of the program. The other way this will connect back to our community of adults who might be here listening is around the way we practice covenant with one another. Our Unitarian Universalism, one of its unique and special qualities is that it's not exclusive in this, but it is a religious tradition that centers on the practice of covenant in community. Covenant, I usually translate with the kids as the promises we make to one another about how we want to be together. So for our kindergartners, our second graders, at the beginning of every year, I ask their teachers to fill out a poster where they talk about three things. How are they this year going to respect themselves? How are they going to respect others? And how are they going to respect the space that they inhabit together? And in that conversation, writing down different ways that they can practice those three values, the class together decides how it wants to be together. But in setting that covenant, you set an anchor for yourself so that you know when we get a little off track, where we want to come back to. We keep practicing this all the way up into our youth group programs. And it's something we practice in our wider congregation here. We talk about core values of community and spiritual deepening and justice, and that becomes an anchor for us to establish care and encourage one another to come back to trying again, to living into these values that we care so much for. Martin Buber, the Jewish theologian, has an important quote I want to remind us of here. Martin Buber says, "We are promise-making, we are promise-keeping, we are promise-breaking, we are promise-renewing people." What an opportunity for second chances, that we might come together and decide how do we want to be together as community and covenant, that we promise keep, that we remember our covenant among one another and keep it valued within our community, that we are promise breaking, that we admit to ourselves that we are not going to perfectly live into the ideals we set out for ourselves, and that we are promise renewing people, that one of the ways that we come back into community is to return to those core values at the core of who we are. I offer this all in your goings to ask yourself this question. Perhaps you need in this moment a little encouragement to try something new again, or you have someone else in your life who could use that encouragement right now. I return you to the top of the diving board. May we offer dignity and care. May we make sure to respect the agency of others and to build it up. And we would give reassurance and empathy and compassion to those in our community so we can encourage all of us to try again. Thank you.
Shalom.